So this is my 2009 Ford Ranger with a V8 swap out of a 2000 Explorer. I'll go through a little bit of what I've done to it, and I'll show you guys the truck. I've got these Mickey Thompson tires with American Racing Outlaw wheels. I bought it with this camper shell on it. It's a pretty clean truck for an 09. It's all dirty today. It's been sitting out at the shop. I'm getting exhaust put on it. I've got Torque Monster headers and a Flowmaster 40 going on it, which is not on there yet. I've got pretty much everything working. The only thing I haven't figured out is the airbag system yet, and I have to hook up my air conditioner stuff, but the wiring is all done. It's got a mild cam in it, so it kind of stumbles at idle a little bit, but got to get the engine tuned. But yeah, everything works. Got this radio, everything like that. Dash isn't quite put back together. It's pretty freshly built. Okay, so to get into some of the details of how this build happened, I'll go through what I've got in here. My engine, all the stuff, all the drivetrain stuff is out of a 2000 Ford Explorer Limited 5.0 all-wheel drive. So I started this swap with the rear axle. It has a Ford 8.8 31 spline rear axle, which I had to have the leaf springs put on the top side. It's a spring under factory, so I had these other mounts welded on here on the top side. Clean it up, did some pour 15 on it. So I got this beefier rear axle in here. I also put the Explorer leaf springs in because they are stiffer than the Ranger springs. Even the stiffest Ranger springs are not as stiff as the Explorer springs. And by doing that, I was able to take out the factory lift block and retain pretty well the same ride height. And that will help with some axle wrap issues. You get a shorter lever arm between your springs and your axle itself, so you'll get less like torque and bending going on there. As far as my drive shafts, I use the stock stock Ranger drive shaft as a base to work from, and I got an F-150 drive shaft for the end of it that goes into the transfer case, because I'm using a BorgWarner 4406 out of an F-150 from 2003. It's an electronic shift case, which I'll get into that a little bit more. And because of that, I had my local Napa change my drive shaft around. They put the F-150 adapter end that goes into the transfer case onto the 2009 Ranger shaft that goes back to the axle. They were able to weld that up, and then the front shaft, I was also able to get that from the F-150, and they were able to kind of bastardize that one together with the Ranger shaft to go into the front diff. So that worked out pretty well. Now, I was reading on the forums, some people will say that you have to move the entire engine and transmission over to the passenger side to fit that 4406 case in one of these Rangers. Now, that may be true for the pre-98 Rangers or something, or maybe mine's just a little different, but it turns out I didn't have to do that. I actually moved the engine like they said, put it all together, and then realized I didn't have to do that, so I moved it back to where it was. And had I had to move it over here to the passenger side, my header would have been hitting the shock tower pretty close. So if you're going to build one of these, try to make it fit, and then move it over if you absolutely have to, but don't assume you have to move that over. The 4406 fits just fine, at least in mine. So with the E-Shift transfer case, since these are all-wheel drive from the Explorer, I ended up using a 4x4 module out of a 2004 Ranger, not that one, but I tried that one and it worked, so I bought another one. And what I did is I standalone wired that in, hooked it up to the transfer case, because the 4406 and the 1354 actually use the same shift motor, so the 4x4 computer doesn't know the difference between the two. And I mounted that shift module inside the truck down in here. Down here, I think the airbag module was here, but I moved the airbag module to the Explorer location in the toe kick fuse box. I got rid of the smart junction box as well. In doing so, I deleted all the remote control functionality, so there's no more keyless entry, no more remote key, anything like that. But the only other function that you have to have with your smart junction box is going to be your power windows. I can't remember. It was power. No, it was power door locks. I think power windows are fine. One or the other. Pretty sure it was power door locks. And I made that work. And they both work. You can see them moving. And the way I did that is I got my own 5-pin relays and I wired it up just as a standalone little relay unit down in there. And that made me a lot of space. As far as the 4-wheel drive computer, on your transfer case side, you hook it up just like it says on the wiring diagram. On the other side, go into the vehicle, you can tap into a lot of your wiring for the gem in here. That'll give you a lot of the signals you need, and then you can run a couple power wires over to your fuse box here, get your power for your transfer case motor and for the computer. So that all works pretty well. Again, moving forward, from there I had my transmission rebuilt, higher stall torque converter put in it to kind of go with the cam, and I had a shift kit put in it, and it's all rebuilt because it was a 200,000 mile motor. And had the motor, well, I rebuilt the motor. I got a new short block, or rebuilt short block, and I put it together from there. GT40P heads, trick flow, cam, or not trick flow cam, trick flow, valve spring upgrade, comp cam. It's a 351, or 35 351-8 cam. I think it's like an XE270 HR. And I ported my lower intake a little bit, kind of gasket matched it, put those headers on. I had to wait about a year on my headers. That was a known quantity going in, you know. And then this computer mount and the wiring, we'll get into that. So the first thing is that my 04 Ranger and like the Explorer, all this older stuff, it used a computer that looks kind of like an old like CD player, and it's got like a stainless steel housing and it's vented, it's got holes in it. And then on these older trucks it would have a sleeve that it bolts into for waterproofing. And this new one doesn't. I mean, you can see straight down through here, you can see the computer. And so that wasn't going to work. So I had my friend create a sleeve to put the computer in, 3D printed a sleeve. And then put some Flex Seal on it. And then I had to also kind of shim this out because that computer is deeper to fit it in here. So hopefully that's going to hold up. It hasn't really rained on this thing too much yet or gotten exposed to much water, but I think that's going to seal up. I sealed the hell out of it. But yeah, with these new Rangers, I think your best bet, and the way I went, is to swap almost all of the vehicle's wiring. So rather than on some of the old stuff, this connector was in common between the 4-liter and the 5.0, and so you could repin this connector a certain way and it would all kind of work out. That is not the case on these 09s, and I can't even show it to you because the 09 wiring is gone, but that connector is going to be all different. It's not going to work. You got a different gauge cluster, you got all that going on. So what I did is I used the engine harness from the Explorer, of course, engine bay harness, battery harness, and dash harness. And then from there, I adapted the the rest of the vehicle inside the cab, along the transmission tunnel, and in a few other small places. And that in itself was quite a task, quite a wiring nightmare, if you will. To go through the books, I bought both books on the Explorer and the Ranger. And I figured out my wiring pinouts, and I will get into that in more depth in another video at some point. But for now, to go through a few things I had to do. There's a relay box down here. I don't know if you can see it. It's kind of below this AC line down in here. Not even sure what it does. I didn't bother to check, but it was in the Explorer harness. And it's mounted to the bottom of the airbox mount. And I was gonna put the Explorer airbox mount in here. It doesn't fit, so I ended up having that bracket welded on to the Ranger airbox mount and bastardize those together so that they work. Then my evap system, I had a bracket created over here, and I plumbed that in. Kind of a hybridation between the Ranger and the Explorer system. I ended up using the Ranger line and fastening it against the firewall back there. And then it comes around and that's all hooked up. And it goes right on. I used the fuse box from the Explorer. I had to have some custom mount work done with that. There's a couple screws back in here. The guy at the shop did some nut certs and screwed that down for me. I think that's about it for my custom bracketry. Most of this really goes in pretty well. I had to change out my windshield wiper motor and the whole linkage because the Explorer has a simpler, well, I won't say simpler, but the system is simpler in the motor itself, and the rest of it is like done externally. So all your speed controls are done by a relay box up in the dash on the Explorer harness. Versus the Ranger, it has all the electronics inside the motor, so that wasn't going to work. So I had to actually, and I tried to adapt it many different ways, but I ended up buying the whole Explorer windshield wiper motor and linkage and everything. It was like 175 bucks, and I just put the whole thing in. Explorer wiper arms, whole 9 yards, Explorer. And that's how I made that work. With your Explorers, you have extra lights. You have extra turn signals, one on each side. And so that resistor there is to fool the thing into thinking that turn signal still exists, so you don't get a fast flash. See, on these lights, you just have one turn signal instead of two. Now for your trailer, or not for your trailer, spoiled my surprise, but for your tail lights, these Rangers use the same bulb for both turn signal and brakes. The Explorer does not. So you come to find that if you hook up your tail lights the way you would think based on the wiring diagrams, whenever you have the turn signal on and then you apply the brakes, well, you've just overridden your turn signal. So that's not going to work. So you end up using the trailer circuit. Just don't even try to make the other thing work. Just use your dedicated trailer circuit and wire those up to the tail lights, and you'll get your tail lights to work no problem. Spent way too long figuring that one out. Yeah, if you guys have any other questions you want to see about it or anything else, let me know. I ended up going with this dash panel from the Explorer with the old style headlight switch that matches the wiring harness, and the dimmer switch. Actually, that one had a little rear park aid switch about here, so I actually got a different bezel. Bought that on a Ranger because I hate having buttons that don't do anything. So I got that, and then I painted up my dash bezel. Bought that with the fog light switch in the right place. All the Ranger stuff. Painted it up nice and shiny silver to match my gauge cluster, which you'll see that's modified too. I put the Ranger style needles on the gauge with and I painted them silver as well on the center. Put LED backlighting in the gauge because I had it all out. Yeah, been all through it. Okay, here's a little part 3 of my Ranger build. So I will kind of show you guys what I did here, and it's all wrapped up and tied up. But in the Ranger, I clipped right here, I clipped my harness going to the back of the truck and just took it out because that was kind of part of the dash harness, and I didn't want to take the entire interior apart and go through all that trouble, and it probably still wouldn't have gotten me anywhere. So I clipped it all here, got the old dash harness out, then I ran all my new stuff down kind of through this bracket here into the transmission tunnel wherever it goes. So in this Explorer dash, up inside of here, there's an 84 pin connector, and you're only going to use about a third to half of those wires. You don't need the rest of them. Some of them are for the windows and stuff, and windows and doors, like all the door circuitry. So I made a pigtail, which I can probably add a picture of in this video, and it starts over here, and a lot of it runs across the dash and down and plugs in, so that door and all that stuff over there is plugged in, and then a little bit of it plugs in to this door, and I use the appropriate door connectors off the old harness and splice them together so that it unplugs the way it should. And then the majority of the wiring goes down to where I was showing you guys along the transmission tunnel. I had to do a little bit of swapping stuff around in the steering column. I think the main thing I did is I changed out this stalk so that the connectors would match up with the Explorer harness, which ultimately means the stalk is in kind of a bad place because the Ranger one was higher, and I like that a little better. So I'm going to look and see if Ford ever had the higher stalk with the other connector on it, or if I can ever change that back, but it's probably fine. I'll probably won't worry about it. Okay, so this is kind of the last item that I could think of that I had to go through. I had to put the Explorer's ABS module in and plumb it up to the Ranger master cylinder. I tried the Explorer master cylinder. They don't mount up. You'd have to change the whole system, whole brake booster and everything. I didn't want to mess with that. So I believe this is correct. I was looking at how it's supposed to go. If this rear line goes to the front, and the front line goes to the rear, which is kind of backwards seeming, but I believe that's how these are set up. If anybody knows for sure that that's wrong, let me know, but I was doing my best to do that research. And the rest of this, it all plumbs in, except for here. For here, I ended up getting an adapter fitting, and I think this bottom fitting came with one of the things in the Explorer, because they have other fittings. Like on the Ranger, these are male. The Explorer had some female fittings with these adapters in there. So I ended up finding a coupler nut that works between these two brake lines. But that was the only incompatibility between the Explorer ABS module and the Ranger brake lines. The rest of that all hooked up. There's two reasons you got to have the Explorer ABS system. One is because it plugs right in, it's easy. Two, your vehicle speed sensor comes right through there. So the ABS computer is a critical part of your VSS, and your VSS sensor comes from the rear axle, and it goes to the ABS, and then it goes to the GEM, and then from the GEM it goes to like the speedometer and everything else. And so you have to have that Explorer ABS computer working at least for the speed control. So I figured I might as well make it work overall. Also, we're using the Explorer rear axle, so it's probably happy to control all that, you know. Figured it just made sense to throw it in there. And then the last thing that I can think of that I had a problem with is that the Explorer has this style of fitting with the nut that screws into the power steering pump. It also has that same style fitting on the bottom on the rack. The Ranger, for whatever reason, the new ones, they changed the rack, and now it has like a fitting with an O-ring that plugs in, and then there's a clip that goes in around it, and there's a nut that bolts it down. And so you'd either have to change out your rack and put an Explorer rack in your Ranger, or do what I did, go to your local Napa Auto Parts, and they'll make a custom hydraulic hose using compression fittings, and you can cut the ends off of your power steering lines from the other stuff, from one from the Ranger, one from the Explorer. Bastardize those together, snug those fittings down until they don't leak, and should be able to call it a day. So I think that's the extent of my little problems and kind of custom engineering I had to do for this thing. Again, if you guys have any questions, let me know. I'll try to get more information to you if you need it. Thanks for watching. Have a good one.